This is the story of Formula One's new teams that competed in the Formula One World Championship during the 2010s. Running on limited budgets, the three teams in question rarely got themselves off the back of the grid to tangle with the more established teams of the time, but nonetheless had their own exciting and challenging battles for the coveted 10th place in the Constructors' Championship. Major rule changes were brought in for 2014 that completely changed the face of Formula One. The 2.4 litre naturally aspirated V8 engines that had been used since 2006 were replaced with 1.6 litre turbocharged V6 hybrids, bringing turbo power back to Formula One for the first time since 1988. The engines were divided into 6 components: the internal combustion engine, or ICE, the turbocharger, or TC, the motor generator unit kinetic, or MGUK, the motor generator unit heat, or MGUH, the energy store, or ES, and the control electronics, or CE. Each driver had their number of allocated engines for the season reduced from 8 to 5, which meant the required mileage for each increased from 1,200 miles to 2,500 miles. The MGUHK would harvest the kinetic energy wasted under braking in a similar manner to KERS. The MGUH would collect the thermal energy expelled from the car's exhausts. The ES acted as a battery that would store this energy. The KERS system was incorporated into this and renamed the Energy Recovery System Kinetic, or ERSK. It now collected the energy stored in the ES, and then using a device called the Kinetic Motor Generator Unit, this energy was applied to the drivetrain to deliver an extra 160 horsepower for 33 seconds per lap, as opposed to the 80 horsepower for 7 seconds per lap delivered by KERS. The main change, however, was that it was now an automated system controlled by the car's ECU, although the driver could manually override it if they so pleased. The maximum RPM of the engines had been reduced from 19,000 RPM to 15,000, and combined with the new components, this meant that the cars went from sounding like this to this. KERS had now gone, but DRS remained. Gear ratios now had to be fixed instead of changing race by race. Teams would nominate 8 different gear ratios at the start of the season to be used at every race. In terms of aerodynamics, the stepped noses were gone, and the maximum height of the nose cone was reduced from 22 inches to 7.3 inches. This resulted in most teams adopting a controversial finger-like appendage at the front of the nose cone, which became informally known as the penis nose. The width of the front wings was reduced from 71 inches to 65 inches. The beam wings sat on top of the rear diffusers were banned. The exhausts now also had to be pointed upwards in order to eliminate any chance of teams using the controversial exhaust-blown diffuser design. In order to compensate for the new engine components, the minimum weight of the cars was increased from 642 kg to 691. Despite the engines being vastly more powerful than the previous year, the weight increase and aerodynamic changes created a drastic drop in downforce, so the cars were now on average 2 to 3 seconds per lap slower than in 2013. Marussia were now a well-oiled machine and had enjoyed a successful 2013 campaign in which they toppled Caterham to take 10th place in the Constructors' Championship and were awarded $14 million for doing so, their first ever prize money. Jules Bianchi had already had his seat for 2014 confirmed at the Korean Grand Prix the previous year, and on January 11th they announced that Max Chilton would be staying as well. Rodolfo Gonzalez left the team, leaving them without a test or reserve driver. Caterham were in dire straits for 2014 as they had seceded 10th place in the Constructors' Championship to Marussia in 2013 and therefore lost $14 million in prize money, but still received $35 million for finishing 10th in 2011 and 2012. Cyril Abiteboul now had a full season as CEO and team principal under his belt, but Caterham Group co-chairman and team founder Tony Fernandez was becoming increasingly frustrated and despairing with the team's lack of progress over the past 4 years. On January 21st, it was announced that 2013 drivers Charles Pic and Guido van der Garde had both lost their seats. Pic moved to Lotus to become their reserve driver, and van der Garde moved to Sauber to become their test and reserve driver. Ma Qinghua had also lost his seat as test driver and moved on to the World Touring Car Championship. On the same day, Caterham announced that their new drivers would be former Toyota and Sauber driver Kamui Kobayashi, who had raised more than £1.3 million through crowdfunding to fund his seat, and experienced GP2 driver Marcus Ericsson. Alexander Rossi retained his seat as reserve driver and continued to race for Caterham's GP2 team alongside Rio Haryanto, and was also joined by GP2 driver Robin Freins, who had served as Sauber's test driver the previous year. 3 pre-season testing sessions were planned for 2014, one at Jerez from January 28th to 31st, and 2 at Bahrain from February 19th to 22nd and February 27th to March 2nd. On the morning of the first day of the first test, Caterham launched their 2014 car, the CT05. It retained the same metallic green livery of the CT03, but otherwise bore almost no resemblance to its predecessor. The most galling part of the design was the strange double nose cone. The car included the low-hanging nose seen on most other cars that year, but above it was a more conventional second nose design that gave a very jagged appearance to the front of the car. Marcus Ericsson drove the car on the first 2 days, but completed only 1 installation lap on the first and 11 laps on the second, and was 14 seconds off of the fastest time. Marussia had meant to launch their car on the first day as well, but had this delayed by a technical glitch, so their 2014 car, the Ferrari-powered MR03, was launched on the third day. As with Caterham's car, it shared almost nothing in common with its predecessor aside from the livery. They had a much more aesthetically pleasing nose design with a much shorter nose appendage than most other teams that was painted black, which largely hid it from view. Chilton drove the car for its first outing on day 3, but completed only 5 installation laps without setting a time. Robin Friends likewise had his first outing in the CT05 and completed 10 installation laps without setting a time after the power unit had to be taken apart in the afternoon. The track was deliberately wetted for the 4th and final day, and this went much better as Bianchi got his first go in the MR03 and completed 25 laps, and Kobayashi got his first go in the CT05 and completed 54 laps, but was 11 seconds slower than Bianchi and had his run ended prematurely by more power unit problems in the afternoon. For the second test in Bahrain, Bianchi and Friends ran on the first day. Friends completed 68 laps, but Bianchi managed only 3 installation laps. Chilton and Kobayashi ran on day 2 and completed 17 and 66 laps respectively. Ericsson took over from Kobayashi on day 3 and completed 98 laps, which meant he'd driven the 300 kilometres he needed to qualify for an FIA Super licence. Marussia once again had power unit trouble, and Chilton completed only 4 installation laps. On the 4th and final day, Ericsson completed only 4 laps in the morning due to an electrical issue, and Kobayashi did only 17 in the afternoon. Bianchi struggled as well and did only 5 installation laps. Going into the third and final test, Caterham had the usual pre-season gremlins but still did a lot of mileage, but Marussia had barely managed any running at all. Kobayashi's Caterham went up in smoke on the morning of the first day, but Chilton in the Marussia managed 44 laps. Bianchi and Ericsson ran on days 2 and 3. Ericsson completed 55 laps on day 2 and Bianchi completed 75. Ericsson completed 117 laps on a faultless day 3 and Bianchi completed 78 laps. On the final day, Kobayashi completed 105 laps and Chilton's car went up in smoke in the morning after only 10 laps, but he completed a further 51 in the afternoon. Both teams arrived in Australia for the first race with numerous teething problems. Bianchi completed only 6 laps in FP1 and Chilton only 4 laps. Ericsson and Kobayashi, by contrast, did not complete any laps after Ericsson's engine cut out on his installation lap and Kobayashi's caught fire after boxing from his installation lap. Marussia fixed their issues to do proper ones in FP2, but Caterham did no running once again as Ericsson had a hydraulics leak on his installation lap and Kobayashi's car was still being fixed from FP1. Bianchi and Chilton had electronics issues in FP3, but Ericsson and Kobayashi finally got some proper running in. Despite these problems, qualifying went better than had been expected. Kobayashi just scraped into Q2 as the Lotuses of Romain Grosjean and Pastor Maldonado struggled with Maldonado failing to set a time. Chilton missed out on Q2 by less than 0.02 of a second to qualify 17th. Bianchi was half a second slower in 18th after having electronics and gearbox problems. Then rain came at the end of the session which prevented him from improving his time. Both cars had beaten the Sauber of Esteban Gutierrez. Ericsson was 0.4 of a second behind Bianchi in 20th. The rain stayed for Q2 and Kobayashi beat the Force India of Sergio Perez to qualify 15th. The grid was moved around drastically for the race. A 5-place grid penalty for the Williams of Valtteri Bottas moved Kobayashi up to 14th, and a 5-place grid penalty for Gutierrez moved Ericsson up to 19th. Chilton's engine cut out at the start of the formation lap and he was quickly wheeled into the pits and lined up at the exit behind Grosjean. Bianchi's engine then cut out after lining up in his grid slot at the end of the formation lap. This triggered a second formation lap while Bianchi was wheeled into the pits and lined up behind Chilton. This meant Ericsson was now starting 17th. When the race finally got going, Ericsson had a shaky start and was passed by Gutierrez. Kobayashi, by contrast, was passed by Bottas but in turn passed the Sauber of Adrian Sutil and the Red Bull of defending champion Sebastian Vettel. However, in the run to turn 1, the rear brakes failed and he heavily locked the front brakes, which caused him to clip the Ferrari of Kimi Raikkonen and spear into the back of the Williams of Felipe Massa, which sent both of them into the gravel trap and out of the race. Gutierrez was sent into a spin at turn 3 and blocked in Vettel, which allowed Ericsson to pass both of them. Chilton managed to leave the pit lane behind Grosjean to start the race, but the team failed to reset Bianchi's car and he was wheeled back into the garage. Chilton managed to pass Grosjean on lap 1 and Gutierrez and Perez then pitted at the end of lap 1, which meant that Ericsson was 13th and Chilton 16th. Chilton passed the struggling Vettel on lap 2. Lewis Hamilton retired at the end of lap 3 and Vettel at the end of lap 4, which moved Ericsson up to 12th and Chilton to 14th. Ericsson passed Sutil on lap 5, but Sutil took the place back on lap 7, and then Maldonado passed him on lap 8. Bianchi's mechanics got his car fixed and sent him out on lap 7, 6 laps down. The safety car was triggered on lap 12 after Bottas's wheel disintegrated and left debris on the track. The race resumed at the end of lap 15 with Ericsson 12th, Chilton 14th and Bianchi 6 laps down in 18th. Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 13. Chilton was passed by Bottas at turn 9 and Perez and Gutierrez at turn 13. Ericsson was passed on lap 17 by Bottas at turn 1 and Perez and Gutierrez at turn 3. Ericsson first pitted on lap 23 and Chilton on lap 24. They both first got the blue flags on lap 26. Ericsson pulled over at turn 4 on lap 27 after losing oil pressure, meaning Caterham started the season with a double retirement. Maldonado then retired on lap 31, which gave another place to Chilton and Bianchi. Teammate Grosjean then did the same on lap 44. Chilton was lapped for a second time on lap 50 and finished the race in 14th. Daniel Ricciardo was disqualified post-race, which moved Chilton up to 13th, his best ever result in Formula 1. Bianchi started the race 6 laps down and was lapped 2 more times on track and so was unclassified. Next up was the Malaysian Grand Prix. Kobayashi's reliability issues continued as he completed only 5 laps in FP1 before the engine cut out and then sat out FP2. This time, rain came for the start of Q1 and was so heavy that qualifying was delayed by 50 minutes. When the session eventually got underway, the two teams took their usual spots on the final 2 rows of the grid. Bianchi was fastest in 19th, Kobayashi was 9/10 of a second slower in 20th, Chilton was 8/10 of a second slower in 21st, and Ericsson was only 0.02 of a second slower in 22nd in his first ever wet weather run in a Formula 1 car, in which he crashed on his second run. Race day was dry. Sergio Perez failed to start the race, which moved all 4 drivers up a place. It was the Caterhams who got away better as Kobayashi passed Bianchi and Ericsson passed Chilton off the line. Kobayashi also passed Jean-Eric Vergne and Pastor Maldonado, but was boxed in by Romain Grosjean at turn 2, which allowed them to close up. In turn 3, Kobayashi pushed Vergne onto the grass and came up alongside Maldonado. Bianchi closed up and they were 4 abreast going into turn 4. Bianchi cut across Vergne, which broke Vergne's front wing and gave Bianchi a puncture, which sent him into the side of Maldonado and put both of them into a spin. Maldonado carried on and Bianchi crawled round to the pits and came out 1 lap down on the leaders. Kimi Raikkonen received a puncture on lap 2 and was passed by Kobayashi, Ericsson and Chilton before pitting. Vergne then pitted as well. On lap 7, Bianchi was afforded a 5-second stop-go penalty for causing the collision with Maldonado. Maldonado retired at the end of lap 7. Bianchi then retired himself on lap 8 with faulty brakes. Chilton first pitted on lap 10, Ericsson on lap 11 and Kobayashi on lap 15. Ericsson came up behind Chilton with Vergne in between them. Ericsson passed Vergne at turn 15 on lap 16. Vergne came back at him down the start-finish straight onto lap 17. He tried to pass Ericsson round the outside at turn 1, but Ericsson lost grip and nearly slid into the side of him, which sent both of them wide. Raikkonen had caught up to both of them at this point and passed Vergne. Raikkonen was now right behind Ericsson and passed him at turn 1 on lap 18. Raikkonen then pitted at the end of lap 18 and Vergne retired on lap 19. Ericsson first got the blue flags on lap 26 and at the same time was repassed by Raikkonen and then pitted for a second time. The exact same happened to Chilton on lap 27 and he came out behind Ericsson. Kobayashi did his second stop on lap 31 for a long final stint on hard tyres. He then first got the blue flags on lap 33 and was now 23 seconds ahead of Ericsson and Chilton. Adrian Sutil then pulled over on the start-finish straight, which moved all 3 drivers up a place. Teammate Esteban Gutierrez then retired on lap 36, which gave all 3 drivers another place. Kobayashi managed to hold off Raikkonen until lap 38. Ericsson then did his third and final stop. Daniel Ricciardo had a loose wheel during his pit stop and he came up behind Kobayashi. Chilton then did his third and final stop on lap 41. Ricciardo then pitted again with a broken front wing and came up behind Ericsson and Chilton and then retired on lap 50. Chilton was lapped for a second time on lap 52 and Ericsson on lap 53, and the race ended with Kobayashi in 13th and Ericsson and Chilton only 1/10 of a second apart in 14th and 15th. This result meant Caterham took 10th place back from Marussia in the Constructors' Championship. Bahrain hosted Formula 1's 900th Grand Prix, which also became a night race. Robin Freins made his Grand Prix weekend debut by driving in place of Kobayashi in FP1. Chilton had a brake disc failure in FP2 which sent him into a spin. The first fully dry qualifying session of the season brought the usual results. Kobayashi was fastest in 19th, but only 2/10 of a second behind Adrian Sutil in 18th. Bianchi was another 2/10 of a second slower in 20th. Ericsson was half a second slower in 21st, and Chilton 0.04 of a second slower in 22nd and last. A 5-place grid penalty for Sutil moved all 4 drivers up a place. Sutil immediately got around Chilton and Ericsson when the lights went out. Kobayashi, Bianchi and Ericsson all passed the slow-starting Romain Grosjean. Ericsson repassed Sutil at turn 3. Jean-Eric Vergne span at turn 8 after getting a puncture and was passed by all 4 drivers. Bianchi managed to pass Kobayashi at turn 13. Ericsson then passed Kobayashi just as they crossed the start-finish line to start lap 2. Grosjean then passed Kobayashi as well at turn 1 on lap 2, and Chilton attempted an unsuccessful pass on Sutil. So now Bianchi was 16th, Ericsson 17th, Kobayashi 19th and Chilton 21st. Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 1 on lap 3 and then Bianchi on the start-finish straight on lap 5. Kobayashi passed Ericsson at turn 1 on lap 6. Sutil then pitted on lap 7. Kobayashi then passed Bianchi at turn 11 on lap 10. Bianchi then pitted and Ericsson and Chilton pitted on lap 11. Bianchi came up behind Sutil. On lap 12 he attempted to pass around the outside at turn 4, but they rubbed wheels and Bianchi was pushed wide. On lap 13 he tried again at turn 1, however he caught the curb and swung his left rear tyre into Sutil's side pod. His left rear then collected with Sutil's front wing which destroyed it and gave Bianchi a puncture and damaged the car's floor. They both crawled round to the pits and Bianchi came out 1 lap down in 21st and Sutil a lap later in 22nd. Vergne then pitted which gave a place to Bianchi. Kobayashi pitted on lap 15 and came out 19th, 5 seconds behind Ericsson and Chilton who were half a second apart. Vergne repassed Bianchi at turn 10 on lap 17 while they were being lapped. They then in turn lapped Sutil. Chilton passed Ericsson at turn 1 on lap 19 and then Kobayashi did the same the following lap. He then passed Chilton as well at turn 1 on lap 21. Sutil and Vergne then retired which left Bianchi on his own at the back. Ericsson did his second stop on lap 26 and Chilton on lap 28 and they were both now lapped. Bianchi was lapped for a second time on lap 31. Kobayashi first got the blue flags on lap 33. Bianchi then did his second planned stop on lap 33 and was now lapped by his main rivals. Ericsson lost power on lap 34 and pulled over at turn 14. Pastor Maldonado and Esteban Gutierrez collided at turn 1 on lap 40 which sent Gutierrez into a barrel roll and brought out the safety car. Kevin Magnussen then also retired and Chilton and Bianchi both pitted. All 3 drivers were permitted to unlap themselves but Bianchi was still 1 lap down. The race resumed at the end of lap 46. Chilton passed Kobayashi at turn 8 for 15th. Maldonado was given a 10-second stop-go penalty and came up behind Chilton and Kobayashi. He caused and passed Kobayashi on lap 54. Jenson Button retired on lap 56 which gave a place to all 3 drivers, and the race ended with Chilton 13th, 1 minute behind Willow Lewis Hamilton, Kobayashi 28 seconds further back in 15th after having to save fuel at the end, and Bianchi 1 lap down in 16th after another difficult race. This meant Marussia took 10th place in the Constructors' Championship back from Caterham. After this, a 2-day in-season test was held at Sakhir. Robin Freins and Chilton ran on the first day and Ericsson and Bianchi on the second. Freins and Caterham were nominated by Pirelli to test out an experimental tyre compound on the first day. Next up was the Chinese Grand Prix. Bianchi managed only 7 laps in FP1 due to a fuel feed issue. There was yet another wet qualifying session. The order was the same as Bahrain, with 1.5 seconds separating the final 2 rows. Pastor Maldonado did not set a time which moved everyone to 18th to 21st. Bianchi passed Kobayashi off the line. Maldonado passed Chilton and Ericsson in the long turns 1 and 2, and in turn 3 Bianchi was passed by Kobayashi and Maldonado. Kobayashi also passed Adrian Sutil. Chilton passed Ericsson around the outside of turn 6, and then he and Bianchi passed Sutil in turns 7 and 8. Ericsson in turn passed Sutil at turn 11. Sutil had been having problems since the lights went out and retired on lap 6. Ericsson first pitted on lap 10, Kobayashi and Bianchi on lap 11, and Chilton on lap 12. Felipe Massa had a minute-long pit stop and came out 10 seconds behind Ericsson. He caught and passed Ericsson on lap 16. Maldonado passed Kobayashi at turn 14 on lap 17. Massa passed Chilton on lap 19. Ericsson first got laps on lap 24 and Chilton on lap 25. Ericsson did his second stop on lap 27 and Bianchi his second and final stop on lap 28. Romain Grosjean then retired, which gave everyone a place. Kobayashi did his second stop on lap 30 and Chilton on lap 32, by which point all four were lapped. Kobayashi caught the ire of Sebastian Vettel on lap 32 when he unlapped himself at turn 6. Massa passed Bianchi on lap 33 and Kobayashi on lap 36, making them the final four runners in the race. Kobayashi did his third and final stop on lap 40 and Ericsson on lap 42. Ericsson was lapped for a second time on lap 46. Chilton then did his third and final stop on lap 48. Kobayashi was rapidly closing in on Bianchi on his much fresher tyres and passed him for 17th at turn 14 on lap 55. The race ran its full distance, however race winner Lewis Hamilton was inadvertently given the checkered flag 1 lap early. The rules dictated the official race end to be taken 1 lap earlier, so Kobayashi's pass on Bianchi was discounted, so the race ended with Bianchi 17th, Kobayashi 18th, Chilton 19th and Ericsson 20th. For the Spanish Grand Prix, both teams brought aerodynamic upgrades. It was Chilton who came out on top in qualifying, but he was over a second slower than Adrian Sutil. Bianchi was 6/10 behind, and then Ericsson and Kobayashi 2/10 behind on the back row. Pastor Maldonado did not set a time, and Jean-Eric Vergne was given a 10-place grid penalty which moved the four drivers to 17th to 20th. Bianchi had a better getaway than Chilton. Chilton was pushed offline by Bianchi at turn 2, which allowed Kobayashi and Ericsson to pass him at turn 3. Chilton was then passed by Vergne and Maldonado at turn 7. Vergne pushed Ericsson wide at turn 10 and passed him. Maldonado then tried to pass him at turn 11, but they snagged wheels which sent both of them onto the grass and allowed Chilton to pass Ericsson. Bianchi attempted to pass around the outside of Sutil at turn 1 on lap 2 but ran wide, but Vergne succeeded in passing Kobayashi and then passed Bianchi at turn 5. Maldonado passed Kobayashi at turn 1 on lap 4 and Bianchi at turn 1 on lap 8, leaving the four drivers as the final four in the field. Chilton did his first stop on lap 17 and Ericsson on lap 18. Ericsson first got lapped on lap 21. Bianchi pitted on lap 21 and Kobayashi on lap 23 and came out behind Chilton and lapped. Vergne retired on lap 25, which gave everyone a place. Bianchi got lapped on lap 26 and Chilton on lap 27. Chilton did his second stop on lap 31. On lap 34, Kobayashi suffered a brake failure at turn 1 and narrowly avoided going into the wall. He then drove round to the pits to retire. Ericsson did his second and final stop on lap 40 and Bianchi on lap 41. Chilton then did his third and final stop on lap 42. Ericsson was lapped for a second time on lap 45, Chilton on lap 49 and Bianchi on lap 57. Another largely uneventful race ended with Bianchi in 18th, Chilton 41 seconds behind in 19th and Ericsson 21 seconds further behind in 20th. An in-season test was held at Catalunya a few days after the race. Chilton and Kobayashi ran on a wet first day. Chilton unexpectedly ended the day fastest after doing a last-minute run on dry tyres, and Kobayashi crashed heavily at turn 3 at the end of the session. Bianchi ran on the second day, and Kobayashi was scheduled to, however the car was still being repaired. Next up was the jewel in the calendar, the Monaco Grand Prix. Chilton span off early in FP1, and rain came before FP2, which meant there wasn't much running until late in the session when the track dried out, but Ericsson still hit the barriers at Portier. He then ended up in the runoff area at Saint-Devote in FP3. Bianchi went fastest in qualifying, 0.6 of a second behind Adrian Sutil in 18th. Chilton was another 0.6 behind in 20th. Kobayashi was 2/10 behind in 21st, and then Ericsson was 1.6 seconds slower in 22nd after colliding with Felipe Massa at the end of the session and sending them both into the wall. Bianchi received a 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change which moved him back to 22nd. On race day, Ericsson ended up starting from the pit lane and Pastor Maldonado failed to start the race, which meant Chilton, Kobayashi and Bianchi started 18th, 19th and 20th. Chilton had a poor start and was passed by Kobayashi and Bianchi into Saint-Devote. Sergio Perez and Jenson Button collided on the approach to the Lowe's hairpin which sent Perez into a spin, partially blocking the track. Sutil and Kobayashi tried to squeeze past together, which caused damage to Sutil's front wing. The safety car was then brought out and Romain Grosjean and Sutil pitted, which meant Kobayashi was 15th, Bianchi 16th, Chilton 17th and Ericsson 18th. The race resumed at the end of lap 3. All 4 drivers passed a struggling Sebastian Vettel on lap 4, who then retired with turbo problems. Sutil passed Ericsson for 17th at the Lowe's hairpin on lap 11, and Daniel Kvyat then retired at the end of the lap, which gave another place to everyone. Sutil then passed Chilton at the Nouvelle chicane on lap 16. Chilton and Bianchi were then awarded 5-second stop-go penalties on lap 16 for being out of position on the grid. Ericsson first got lapped on lap 23. Sutil crashed out at the Nouvelle chicane on lap 24, which brought out the safety car. Chilton pitted and also served his time penalty just before it was called. Kobayashi, Bianchi and Ericsson all pitted on lap 25. By pitting before the safety car was called, Chilton and Ericsson both came up behind Grosjean. All 3 were permitted to unlap themselves. However, Chilton rear-ended Kimi Raikkonen, which forced both to pit again, with Raikkonen coming out behind Kobayashi in 13th and Chilton remaining a lap down in 17th. The race resumed at the end of lap 30. Raikkonen attempted to pass on Kobayashi at the Nouvelle chicane on lap 33, however he locked up and cut the chicane and allowed Kobayashi back through. He attempted this again on lap 35, however this time Kobayashi locked up and cut the chicane. He then did successfully pass him at Raskas at the end of the lap. At the same time, Bianchi squeezed through on the inside to take 13th, and in doing so hit Kobayashi 3 times, which damaged his floor and side pod. Jean-Eric Vergne took a drive-through penalty on lap 37 and came up just behind Bianchi. Grosjean and Ericsson passed Kobayashi at the Nouvelle chicane on lap 39, who was now rapidly losing time. Chilton was stuck 1 lap behind a struggling Kobayashi, and they were lapped at the same time on laps 45 and 46. Ericsson was lapped on lap 51. Vergne had been on Bianchi's tail since taking his penalty but retired on lap 51 with an exhaust failure. Ericsson then came in for his second stop. Valtteri Bottas then pulled over at the Lowe's hairpin on lap 56, which meant Bianchi was now 11th, Ericsson 45 seconds behind in 13th, Kobayashi 27 seconds behind in 14th, and Chilton 1 lap down in 15th. Bianchi was lapped on lap 60. Esteban Gutierrez then crashed out at Raskas, which meant he was now 10th. Kobayashi and Chilton were then lapped for a second and third time respectively. Kobayashi did his second stop on lap 62. Bianchi was then given a 5-second time penalty on lap 65 for serving his previous penalty during the safety car period. Chilton did his second stop on lap 66. On lap 73, Raikkonen attempted to pass on Kevin Magnussen at the Lowe's hairpin. However, he got stuck against the wall and boxed Magnussen in with him, which allowed Bianchi and Grosjean to pass both of them. Raikkonen then pitted and was passed by Ericsson, which moved him up to 11th, and Kobayashi was then lapped for a third time. Bianchi crossed the finish line in 8th, however the 5-second penalty meant he was classified in 9th, 3.5 seconds behind Grosjean, who had been shadowing him most of the race. Ericsson finished in 11th, less than a second ahead of Raikkonen, and Kobayashi and Chilton finished 3 laps down in 13th and 14th. After 4 years and 83 races, one of the 2 remaining new teams had finally scored championship points. Bianchi was voted Fanatic Reader's Driver of the Weekend, and by scoring 2 points, not only had they all but secured 10th place in the Constructors' Championship, but had also moved into 9th by overtaking Sauber, who were yet to score a point. For Caterham, it was a bitter blow. They remained 11th in the Constructors' Championship. Ericsson had given them their best result of the season and their best result since the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix. However, they knew there would be little chance of high attrition races like that happening again that year that would allow them to grab points of their own. After the high of Monaco, it was time to fly across the Atlantic for the Canadian Grand Prix. Alexander Rossi was given his first outing in the CT05 in place of Kobayashi in FP1. Bianchi hit the wall at turn 4 in FP1 and broke his right rear track rod and had to have the gearbox replaced. Ericsson lost transmission in FP2, and Bianchi then lost the powertrain. Esteban Gutierrez did not take part in qualifying, but still none of the drivers came anywhere near getting into Q2. Chilton was fastest, only 0.02 of a second behind Pastor Maldonado. Bianchi was another 0.02 of a second behind in 19th. Kobayashi was almost a second slower in 20th, and Ericsson half a second slower in 21st after crashing at turn 9 on his second run. Kobayashi was given a 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change, and so started 21st with Gutierrez starting from the pit lane. Chilton passed Maldonado off the line, and then Bianchi passed Maldonado at turn 1 and Kobayashi passed Ericsson at turn 2. Chilton's record-breaking 25-race finishing streak came to an end at turn 4. Bianchi tried to pass Chilton around the outside at turn 3. Chilton lost grip and slid into Bianchi. Bianchi locked his right rear wheel with Chilton's left front, which broke both their suspensions and sent Bianchi backwards into the wall at turn 4, which ripped off the rear wing and axle. Chilton pulled over between turns 4 and 5 and the safety car was immediately deployed. The race resumed at the end of lap 7. Ericsson immediately pulled into the pits to retire as he had felt a drop in power from the turbo since the formation lap. Kobayashi continued alone in 18th. Daniel Kvyat span at turn 2 on lap 10 and was passed by Kobayashi. Gutierrez passed Kobayashi at turn 13 on lap 11 and Kvyat did the same on lap 13. Maldonado retired on lap 22, which gave a place to Kobayashi. However, on lap 24 he span at turn 2 and then pulled over at turn 4 as the left rear suspension had given way, making this the first race since the 2010 Monaco Grand Prix in which none of the new teams saw the checkered flag. The next race saw the return of the Austrian Grand Prix after an 11-year absence. Ericsson's ERSH control unit cut out after only 8 laps in FP1. Bianchi was fastest in qualifying in 19th, less than a tenth behind Esteban Gutierrez in 18th. Kobayashi was a quarter of a second slower in 20th. Chilton was a tenth slower in 21st, and then Ericsson was 9/10 of a second slower in 22nd. Chilton received a 5-place grid penalty for causing the accident with Bianchi at Canada and so started 22nd. Romain Grosjean then opted to start from the pit lane, which moved everyone up a place. Chilton passed Ericsson at the Niki Lauda curve at the start but was repassed at Remus. Sebastian Vettel lost drive on the run up to Remus on lap 2 and was passed by all 4 drivers. Grosjean then passed Chilton at Schlossgold and Ericsson at Rindt. He then pitted at the end of lap 3. Kobayashi passed Bianchi at Remus on lap 9. Gutierrez was running 5 seconds ahead of Kobayashi when he pitted on lap 12 and left his pit box with a loose wheel and came out far behind the 4 drivers. Grosjean caught and passed Chilton on lap 13. Kobayashi made his only stop on lap 14 and came out 20th. Grosjean then passed Ericsson on lap 18. Daniel Kvyat retired on lap 25, which moved everyone up a place. Kobayashi passed Chilton on fresher tyres at Remus on lap 26. Ericsson made his first stop on lap 28 and came out 15 seconds behind Chilton and 1 lap down. Chilton first got lapped on lap 32. Ericsson caught and passed Chilton on lap 36 and Kobayashi first got lapped. Chilton then did his sole pit stop the following lap. Grosjean eventually passed Kobayashi on lap 39. Bianchi made his sole stop on lap 40 and came out 5 seconds behind Ericsson and 27 seconds ahead of Chilton. Ericsson did his second and final stop on lap 43 and came out just behind Bianchi. Bianchi caught and passed the struggling Kobayashi at the Niki Lauda curve on lap 56. Ericsson was lapped for a second time on lap 57 and Chilton on lap 59. Jean-Eric Vergne retired on lap 60, which gave another place to everyone. Kobayashi was lapped for a second time on lap 63 and Bianchi on lap 68. A quiet race ended with Bianchi in 15th, Kobayashi 32 seconds behind after a 55-lap second stint, Chilton 2 seconds behind in 17th, and Ericsson 7 seconds behind in 18th, only 0.2 of a second ahead of Gutierrez. At the British Grand Prix, Caterham announced that Tony Fernandes had sold the team to a consortium of Swiss and Middle Eastern investors called Engevest SA. They kept the team name and their factory in Oxfordshire, but the upper management of the team had been transformed. Former HRT boss Colin Colles was now an advisor representing the new investors. Colles' father Romulus became director of Caterham Sports Limited, who designed and built the team's cars. Cyril Abiteboul was removed as team principal and replaced with former Minardi MF1 and Spiker driver Christian Albers, being assisted by Manfredi Rivetto. Reserve driver Alexander Rossi left both the F1 team and the GP2 team. The revamped Caterham team gave Robin Freins a run in the car in FP1, although an electrical issue after his installation lap prevented him from running for most of the session. Meanwhile, Ericsson got stuck in the gravel midway through FP1. Bianchi also had limited running in FP1 and FP2 with powertrain issues. Saturday was wet, which produced another mixed-up grid. Ericsson and Kobayashi both struggled to adjust to the changing conditions after attempting runs on dry tyres and qualified 21st and 22nd, outside of the 107% time, but they were still permitted to race. Bianchi and Chilton, however, set the 4th and 6th fastest times in Q1 to comfortably qualify for Q2. In Q2, they set the 12th and 13th fastest times, by far the team's best ever qualifying result, but had their last runs ruined by a spin from Esteban Gutierrez. Chilton received a 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change and moved back to 17th for the race. Felipe Massa stalled when the lights went out and Grosjean had a very slow start and were passed by all 4 drivers. Chilton was passed by Gutierrez off the line. Bianchi was passed by Valtteri Bottas at Abbey, and Jean-Eric Vergne sent Sergio Perez into a spin and were passed by all 4 drivers. Ericsson passed Maldonado and Chilton Serena. Kimi Raikkonen ran wide and hit the barriers on the Wellington Straight and bounced back onto the track and collided with Massa. Chilton's front left brake duct was hit by a wheel rim and damaged. Kobayashi narrowly avoided Massa and was forced onto the grass. The race was then red flagged. Bianchi, Ericsson and Kobayashi went back round to the grid, and Chilton went to the pit lane exit to repair his suspension. The race recommenced behind the safety car 1 hour later, with Bianchi 10th, Ericsson 15th, Kobayashi 18th and Chilton 20th. Chilton was awarded a drive-through penalty for entering the pits while the race was suspended, and would also have to start the race 1 lap down. The race resumed at the end of lap 2. Grosjean passed Ericsson at Stowe. Chilton then served his penalty. Fernando Alonso passed Bianchi at Copse on lap 4 and Vergne passed Ericsson at Stowe. Perez then passed Kobayashi at Stowe on lap 5. Adrian Sutil attempted to pass on Bianchi at Brooklands on lap 6, but Bianchi took it back. Perez passed Ericsson at the same place. Kobayashi passed Ericsson at Brooklands on lap 8. Sutil then successfully passed Bianchi at Stowe. Gutierrez retired on lap 11, which gave a place to Kobayashi, Ericsson and Chilton. Bianchi was then passed by Vergne. On lap 12, Ericsson hit the curb at Brooklands, which smashed his suspension and put him out of the race. Grosjean passed Bianchi at Stowe. Perez passed Bianchi there on lap 14, and then Maldonado as well on lap 16, which left the 3 remaining drivers as the final 3 in the field. Kobayashi made his first stop on lap 18 and came out a lap down. Chilton was lapped for a second time on lap 19. Bianchi was first lapped on lap 28. Race leader Nico Rosberg then retired, which gave a place to everyone. Bianchi and Chilton made their sole pit stops, and Kobayashi made his second and final stop the following lap. All 3 drivers gained a place from a retiring Pastor Maldonado on lap 49, and the race ended with Bianchi 14th, 34 seconds behind the next car, and Kobayashi and Chilton 1 lap down in 15th and 16th, 31 seconds apart. A 2-day test took place at Silverstone a couple of days after the race. Caterham ran Academy member Will Stevens on the first day, and then GP2 drivers Rio Haryanto and Julian Leal on the second day. However, an MGUH failure in the morning after Leal's installation lap meant time ran out to run Haryanto in the afternoon. Marussia ran Bianchi on the first day, where he suffered a small fire in the afternoon, and then Chilton on the second day, who tried out new suspension. On the second day, Bianchi drove for Ferrari as an academy driver. Caterham also launched a new driver development program and brought on GP2 driver Nathaniel Berton as the first member. Next up was the German Grand Prix, this year held at the Hockenheimring. Caterham announced further restructuring, with Christian Albers being officially appointed team principal, Manfredi Ravetto as deputy team principal, and John Eiley as the new technical director. They also cut about 1/3 of the total workforce at the factory. More than 40 ex-employees then attempted to take legal action against the team over their alleged unfair dismissals. Caterham then had reliability problems on Friday, with Ericsson losing oil pressure in FP1 and Kobayashi catching fire in FP2. Marussia ran their new suspension components. Bianchi went fastest in qualifying and also out-qualified Pastor Maldonado to line up 18th. Kobayashi was 0.8 of a second slower in 20th. Chilton was just behind in 21st, and Ericsson failed to set a time after suffering a hydraulics leak earlier in the day in FP3. He then had to start the race from the pit lane and serve a 10-second stop-go penalty within the first 3 laps of the race, as his team had failed to cover and seal his car before curfew, which was a breach of Parc Fermé regulations. Lewis Hamilton crashed in Q2 and was given a 5-place grid penalty for changing the gearbox, which moved him back to 20th and moved Bianchi up to 17th and Kobayashi up to 19th. Bianchi stalled at the start, so Kobayashi and Chilton immediately weaved around him. In the process, Kobayashi was passed by Hamilton and Chilton. Felipe Massa and Kevin Magnussen collided at the Nord curve, which sent Magnussen into a spin and flipped Massa's car upside down, so the safety car immediately came out. Hamilton ran onto the curbs at the Nord curve, which allowed Chilton to pass him. The race resumed at the end of lap 2 with Chilton 16th, Kobayashi 18th, Bianchi 19th and Ericsson 20th. Hamilton immediately passed Chilton at turn 2. Bianchi then passed Kobayashi at the hairpin. Ericsson pitted and served his penalty at the end of lap 3 and came out 22 seconds behind Magnussen, who had pitted during the safety car. Bianchi passed Chilton at the hairpin on lap 4. Magnussen passed Kobayashi at the hairpin on lap 8 and Chilton there on lap 9. Sergio Perez sent Daniel Kvyat into a spin at the Mercedes curve on lap 9, who then pitted and came out behind Kobayashi. Magnussen then passed Bianchi at the hairpin on lap 11. Kvyat passed Kobayashi at the hairpin on lap 14. Kobayashi first pitted on lap 15, Chilton on lap 16, Ericsson for a second time on lap 18, who came out a lap down, and Bianchi on lap 20. By using the undercut, Kobayashi got ahead of Chilton. Both were first laps on lap 23. Romain Grosjean retired on lap 27, which moved everyone up a place. Bianchi was first lapped on lap 32, and Kobayashi and Chilton both then did their second stops. Ericsson did his third and final stop on lap 41 and was lapped for a second time on lap 43. Bianchi did his second and final stop on lap 45. Kvyat retired on lap 46, which gave another place to everyone. Chilton and Kobayashi did their third and final stops on laps 47 and 48. Adrian Sutil span off on lap 48, which gave Les another place to everyone. Chilton and Kobayashi were both lapped for a second time on lap 51 while they were only a second apart. The race ended with Bianchi in 15th, Kobayashi 16th, Chilton 12 seconds behind in 17th, and Ericsson 29 seconds further back in 18th. The final race before the summer break was the Hungarian Grand Prix. Marussia announced that Alexander Rossi had joined them from Caterham as their new reserve driver. Kevin Giovasi was also added as the second driver to Caterham's driver development programme. Chilton suffered a small fire after his installation lap in FP1 and had to replace the gearbox. Lewis Hamilton and Pastor Maldonado failed to set any qualifying times, which meant Bianchi advanced into Q2 by also beating Kimi Raikkonen to start 16th. Kobayashi was 18th, Chilton was 7 tenths slower in 19th after suffering an electrical failure on his second run, and Ericsson was 8 tenths slower than Chilton in 20th. Kevin Magnussen joined Hamilton in the pit lane for the start, which moved the 4 drivers to 15th, 17th, 18th and 19th. Rain came before the race, so all drivers started on intermediates. Daniel Kvyat stalled on the grid at the start of the formation lap and became the third driver to start from the pit lane, moving all 4 drivers up another place. Kobayashi passed Raikkonen off the line, but Raikkonen then passed Kobayashi and Bianchi on the run to turn 2. Maldonado passed Ericsson at turn 13, and Magnussen then passed Ericsson at turn 1 on lap 2. Hamilton and Kvyat both passed Ericsson on lap 3, moving him to last. Chilton was passed by Kvyat and Hamilton on lap 4, the latter of whom also passed Kobayashi. Magnussen passed Chilton at the turn 1 on lap 5. Hamilton passed Bianchi on lap 6, and Maldonado passed Chilton. Chilton repassed Maldonado at turn 4 on lap 7, and Kvyat passed Kobayashi at turn 12, and Magnussen passed him at turn 1 on lap 8. 3 corners later, Ericsson lost control while immediately behind Maldonado and Chilton and hit the barriers, tearing off both wings and wheels. The safety car was immediately deployed. Bianchi, Kobayashi and Chilton then all joined everyone else in pitting for dry tyres. The safety car was due to come back in at the end of lap 11, however Romain Grosjean then crashed out at the same place as Ericsson, so the race resumed at the end of lap 13, with Bianchi 15th, Kobayashi 19th and Chilton 20th. Nico Hülkenberg crashed out at turn 14 on lap 15, and both McLarens made a late stop for dry tyres, which moved everyone up 3 places, but Bianchi was then passed by Sutil and Kvyat on the run to turn 1. On lap 17, Maldonado attempted to pass Bianchi at turn 1 but ran wide and collided with him, which damaged Bianchi's side pod and sent Maldonado into a spin where he nearly collected Kobayashi. They pitted and came out 18th and 19th. Button passed Chilton at turn 1 on lap 18. At turn 1 on lap 20, Button passed Kobayashi and Magnussen passed Chilton. Magnussen then passed Kobayashi at turn 1 on lap 22. Sergio Perez crashed into the pit wall on lap 23, which brought out the safety car for a second time. On lap 26, while still under the safety car, Kobayashi lost power at turn 12 and gave Caterham a double retirement. The race resumed at the end of lap 26, with Chilton 15th and Bianchi 16th. Bianchi immediately passed Chilton at turn 1. Maldonado then passed Chilton at turn 1 on lap 28, and then Bianchi at the same place on lap 29, leaving them as the final 2 in the field. Esteban Gutierrez retired on lap 33, which moved them to 15th and 16th. Bianchi made his final stop on lap 42 and Chilton on lap 45, and they were both now lapped. They finished the race half a second apart in 15th and 16th, 30 seconds behind Kvyat in 14th. At the start of the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, Marussia unexpectedly announced that due to contractual issues, their new reserve driver Alexander Rossi would be racing instead of Chilton. Caterham also announced that Kobayashi would stand down for the weekend and have his seat taken by Andre Lotterer. The 32-year-old was the oldest rookie in almost 20 years and had last driven an F1 car as a test driver for Jaguar in 2002, but had experience in endurance racing as a 3-time Le Mans winner. The car itself also received a facelift, as the distinctive double nose cone was replaced with a more conventional design. Lotterer went faster than Ericsson in FP1. Rossi's weekend came to an end early, as after FP1 the team announced Chilton's contractual issues had been resolved and he was back in the car for FP2. Qualifying was wet. Bianchi managed to scrape into Q2 for the second race in a row by beating Pastor Maldonado, Nico Hülkenberg and Esteban Gutierrez to line up 16th. Chilton was 1.5 seconds slower but still beat Gutierrez to qualify 19th. Lotterer was 9/10 of a second slower than Chilton in 21st, but was almost a second faster than Ericsson on his Grand Prix debut. Race day was dry. Chilton was passed by Gutierrez off the line. Bianchi passed Grosjean at La Source, but was in turn passed by Hulkenberg. Lotterer also passed Chilton. On the exit of La Source, Grosjean's front wing clipped Bianchi's right rear tyre, which gave him a puncture. Ericsson passed Chilton down the Kemmel Straight. Grosjean pitted for a new wing, and Bianchi crawled round and came out far behind in last. Race leader Lewis Hamilton received a puncture from teammate Nico Rosberg on lap 2 and was passed by Lotterer, Ericsson and Chilton as he crawled round to the pits. Lotterer then ran wide at Blanchimont and hit the curb, which cut the power, so he stopped in the pit lane entrance, ending his race early. Maldonado then retired at the bus stop chicane, which moved Ericsson to 16th, Chilton to 17th and Bianchi to 20th. Ericsson and Chilton made their first pit stops on lap 11. Grosjean passed Chilton on lap 15 and Ericsson on lap 16. Hamilton pitted on lap 17. He passed Chilton at the bus stop chicane on lap 18 and Ericsson at La Source on lap 19. Bianchi did his second stop on lap 23 and came out lapped. Ericsson did his second stop on lap 24 and Chilton on lap 29 and also came out lapped. Ericsson was then lapped on lap 30. Grosjean retired on lap 34, which gave all three drivers a place. Hamilton then retired on lap 39, which gave them another place. Bianchi then pulled into the garage at the end of lap 41 with a suspected gearbox issue while running 20 seconds behind Chilton. Chilton had been running right behind Ericsson the whole race and finally passed him at Les Combes on lap 42, so they finished in formation in 16th and 17th. Caterham offered for Lotterer to race for them again at the Italian Grand Prix. However, they had also decided to run Formula Renault 3.5 Series driver Roberto Merri in the car in FP1 in order to get the required mileage for his FIA Super licence, so Lotterer declined the offer as he said he would only race if he could have the maximum preparation time. Kobayashi therefore returned to his usual seat, though he expressed his displeasure with the uncertainty of his position within the team under its new management. Kobayashi then made a statement by going fastest in qualifying in 19th. Bianchi was 7/100ths behind in 20th. Chilton was half a second slower in 21st, and then Ericsson 3/10 slower in 22nd. A grid penalty for Daniel Kvyat moved Kobayashi, Bianchi and Chilton all up a place. On race day, Ericsson started from the pit lane as a penalty for a yellow flag infringement in FP3. Kobayashi, Bianchi and Chilton all passed a poor starting Romain Grosjean off the line. Kvyat passed Chilton and Bianchi at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 2, and then Kobayashi there on lap 3. Grosjean then passed Chilton at Variante della Roggia. Chilton repassed him at the same place on lap 4. 2 laps later, once again at Variante della Roggia, Chilton ran wide going through the chicane and hit the sausage curbs, which sent him into the wall and out of the race. Grosjean attempted a pass on Bianchi at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 12, but then passed him at Variante della Roggia. Kobayashi did his sole pit stop on lap 23. Ericsson first got lapped on lap 27 and Bianchi pitted at the end of that lap and came out lapped as well. Grosjean then passed Kobayashi at Variante della Roggia. Fernando Alonso then retired, which gave everyone a place. Kobayashi was lapped on lap 30 and Ericsson then did his pit stop. Ericsson was lapped for a second time on lap 45. Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez collided on lap 49, which gave Gutierrez a puncture. He crawled round to the pits and came out behind Bianchi. Kobayashi came home in 17th, 30 seconds behind Grosjean. Bianchi was 13 seconds behind in 18th. Ericsson was a lap down in 20th, 11 seconds behind Gutierrez. However, Gutierrez was given a 20-second time penalty for his collision with Grosjean, and so Ericsson was classified 19th. After the race, Christian Albers announced his resignation as team principal after only 5 races. The vacancy was filled by his former second-in-command Manfredi Rivetto. Next up was the lights of the Singapore Grand Prix. Bianchi went comfortably fastest in qualifying in 19th. Kobayashi was an entire second slower in 20th. Chilton was 7/100ths slower in 21st, and Ericsson was compounded by electrical problems and lack of telemetry to qualify almost 2 seconds slower in 22nd. Championship leader Nico Rosberg stalled at the start of the formation lap and had to start from the pit lane, moving all 4 drivers up a place. However, only 3 of the 4 drivers would start the race, as Kobayashi pulled over at turn 8 on the formation lap after losing power and the brakes. Ericsson passed Chilton around the outside of turn 1 at the start, and Rosberg passed Chilton on lap 3. Ericsson made his first pit stop on lap 12. Rosberg had been stuck behind Ericsson since passing Chilton as he had the use of only 2 gears and retired on lap 14. Bianchi made his first stop on lap 15 and Chilton on lap 16. Esteban Gutierrez retired on lap 17, which gave a place to everyone. Chilton pitted again on lap 18 after a faulty tyre valve gave him a puncture, which left him lapped. Ericsson got lapped on lap 23. The safety car was brought out on lap 31 after Sergio Perez's front wing exploded and littered the track with debris. Bianchi and Ericsson both pitted, and Bianchi too was lapped but almost managed to jump Perez. All three drivers were permitted to unlap themselves. The race resumed at the end of lap 37. Perez passed Bianchi at turn 7 on lap 39. Adrian Sutil retired on lap 41, which gave everyone another place. Chilton made his final stop on lap 42. Bianchi did his on lap 45 and came out 23 seconds behind Ericsson and 22 seconds ahead of Chilton. Chilton was lapped again on lap 48. Jenson Button retired on lap 53, which gave everyone another place. The delay with the safety car meant the race finished one lap early due to the 2-hour time limit being reached. Ericsson ran a long final stint to finish 15th. Bianchi closed up rapidly at the end on fresher tyres to finish half a second behind in 60th, and Chilton was one lap down in 17th and last. A few days after the race, Bailiffs visited Caterham's factory and seized several key items, including the simulator, one of their 2013 cars, and spare parts intended to be used for the next two races. This was done as repayment of debts of up to £20 million owed by Caterham Sports Limited, who were responsible for the manufacturing of the Caterham F1 team's cars. Staff were also ordered out of the building, which was locked and secured. Next up was Kobayashi's home race, the Japanese Grand Prix. Marussia announced that Will Stevens had been brought on as their second reserve driver alongside Alexander Rossi. He was due to take Chilton's seat in FP1, however problems with his paperwork prevented this from happening. Caterham also gave Roberto Merri a second go in the CT05 and FP1. A marooned Caterham also brought a new front wing to try out, however Kobayashi crashed and damaged it in FP2. It was Ericsson who went fastest in qualifying, although he was 0.8 of a second off of the next car. Bianchi was a 10th behind in 20th. Kobayashi was another 10th behind in 21st, and Chilton was half a second slower in 22nd after spinning on his final run. A grid penalty for Pastor Maldonado moved all four drivers up a place, and a grid penalty for Jean-Eric Verne moved Ericsson, Bianchi and Kobayashi all up another place. A weakening Typhoon Fanfone made landfall in Japan on Saturday night and brought torrential rain in time for the race the following day. All drivers started on full wet tyres, and the race was started behind the safety car. There was very little grip, and Ericsson span on the exit of the final corner. He got stuck in the gravel trap, however the marshals pushed him out and he carried on in 22nd. Due to lack of visibility, the race was red flagged after only 2 laps, so the cars lined up in the pit lane. The race was restarted behind the safety car 20 minutes later. Fernando Alonso pulled over in the first sector, which gave a place to everyone. The safety car came in at the end of lap 9 and the race finally got underway. Jenson Button and Pastor Maldonado immediately pitted for intermediate tyres and came out last. Ericsson passed Chilton at turn 9. Kobayashi, Ericsson and Chilton all pitted for intermediates on lap 11 alongside most of the field. By double stacking, Ericsson came out back behind Chilton. Bianchi then did the same on lap 13 after briefly being up to 3rd place and came out 5 seconds ahead of Kobayashi in 18th. Kevin Magnussen pitted for a new steering wheel on lap 15 and came out behind Ericsson. Ericsson repassed Chilton at the hairpin on lap 16. Magnussen then passed Chilton now on lap 17. Ericsson passed Kobayashi at the hairpin on lap 22. DRS was enabled on lap 24 as the rain had stopped falling. Chilton then pitted for a second time and came out lapped. Bianchi then pitted the following lap and Magnussen passed Kobayashi at turn 1. Ericsson and Kobayashi pitted on laps 25 and 26 and both came out lapped. Bianchi got the blue flags on lap 26. Bianchi was now in 18th with Ericsson 3 seconds behind in 19th, Kobayashi another 17 seconds behind in 20th and Chilton 9 seconds behind in 21st. Ericsson passed Bianchi at the hairpin on lap 28. Adrian Sutil pitted on lap 32 and came out 3 seconds behind Bianchi. Romain Grosjean pitted on lap 34 and came out behind Ericsson. The rain began to fall again on lap 36. Kobayashi pitted on lap 38 and came out behind Chilton. Ericsson then pitted for full wet on lap 39 and came out behind Bianchi and Sutil. Kobayashi then had to pit again for full wets, which left him much further behind. By lap 40, grip was fading and so was the light as the rain intensified, so DRS was disabled. Things, however, were about to take a turn for the worst. The increasing rain had caused a small stream to form at the Dunlop curve. Sutil had been right on Bianchi's tail since his pit stop, but on lap 42 he caught this stream and slid across the gravel and into the barriers. Yellow flags were waved while a crane was deployed to remove his car. On the following lap, Bianchi hit the same bit of water. He went across the gravel trap and hit the rear of the crane helmet first at 75 miles per hour. The roll bar and engine cover were torn off by the impact and the crane was knocked off its wheels, which caused it to drop Stittil's car. The safety car was deployed on lap 44 along with the medical car after Bianchi did not respond to either the marshals nor a radio call from his team. An ambulance was brought to the scene and the race was red flagged on lap 46 and not resumed once the severity of Bianchi's injuries became known. The race result was taken from the end of lap 44, so Ericsson finished 17th, Chilton 18th, Kobayashi 19th and Bianchi was classified in 20th. Bianchi was taken to the circuit's medical centre, and from there he was driven to the Mie Prefectural General Medical Centre in Gokaichi. A CT scan revealed a diffuse axonal injury. He was then admitted to the intensive care unit and placed in an induced coma. An investigation of the accident was also conducted and found that after losing control, Bianchi had applied the throttle and the brakes together, which normally would trigger a fail-safe mechanism found on all cars that would cut the engine power. However, the MR03 was equipped with a brake-by-wire system that was incompatible with this, and as such the fail-safe was not triggered. The accident prompted debate and discussion about rules surrounding yellow flags and ways of increasing cockpit protection, which eventually led to the introduction of the virtual safety car and the Halo device. Formula One then travelled with a heavy heart to Sochi for the inaugural Russian Grand Prix. Marussia had originally planned to run Alexander Rossi in place of the injured Bianchi, but on Friday morning they decided to withdraw the second car out of respect for Bianchi and only run Chilton. Bianchi's car was fully prepared and put on display in his garage for the duration of the weekend, and the hashtag JB17 graphic was put on the side of both cars. Roberto Merri ran in FP1 in place of Kobayashi for the third time that year. Ericsson surprised in qualifying by beating both Felipe Massa and Pastor Maldonado to qualify 17th. Kobayashi also beat Maldonado but was half a second slower in 19th. Chilton was another half a second slower in 21st. He received a needless 5-place grid penalty but ended up moving forward 1 place, as Maldonado in 20th received a 10-place grid penalty. A grid penalty for Nico Hülkenberg also moved Ericsson up to 16th. A minute's silence for Bianchi was held on the grid before the start of the race. Ericsson was passed by Hülkenberg and Chilton by Maldonado off the line. Ericsson passed Roman Grosjean at turn 2. Grosjean and Massa both passed Ericsson around a long turn 4. Ericsson then passed Chilton at turn 6. Massa and Nico Rosberg pitted at the end of lap 1 and came up behind Chilton. Chilton made a very early first stop on lap 4. Rosberg passed Kobayashi on lap 5 and then Massa passed him on lap 6. They then passed Ericsson on laps 8 and 9. Chilton pulled into the garage on lap 10 with a suspension failure, ending a difficult weekend for Marussia early. Kobayashi got lapped on lap 21. He then pitted and retired with overheating brakes, leaving Ericsson to carry on alone. Ericsson pitted on lap 27 and came out in 18th. He got lapped on lap 30. Ericsson had built a 10-second lead over Maldonado during the first stint, but the second stint wasn't so good and Maldonado eventually passed him on lap 41. Ericsson then did his second stop on lap 43. He was lapped for a second time on lap 50 and finished the race in 19th and last. In the week after the Russian Grand Prix, Romulus Colles resigned as CSL director and team principal Manfredi Rivetto appointed factory floor cleaner and former Romanian under-21s footballer Constantin Coiacaru as director in his place. The Colles Racing Factory in Germany became the team's unofficial headquarters, and after the Russian Grand Prix, all remaining assets were taken there to prevent them being seized if returned to the factory in Leafield. A spat occurred between current team owners Engevest SA, who accused former owner Tony Fernandez of failing to transfer his shares to them when he sold the team in July, meaning it was still owned by parent company One Malaysia Racing Team represented by Fernandez. The following week, Caterham announced that they had gone into administration and withdrawn the entire management team. The administrator Smith and Williamson then appointed accountant Finbar O'Connell to become acting team principal. Remaining staff at the factory had their cars searched by private security contractors hired by Smith and Williamson, including former British Army soldiers. The factory was then locked down for good. In the same week, Marussia announced that they had also gone into administration and had FRP Advisory LLP appointed as administrators. The FIA gave permission to both teams to miss the United States and Brazilian Grand Prix in order to acquire the necessary funds for the final race in Abu Dhabi. Marussia looked for a new buyer after their main financial backer Andrei Cheglakov withdrew his support, and on November 5th they appeared on the provisional 2015 entry list as Manor F1 team. However, 2 days later, the team officially folded and made all staff redundant. On that same day, Caterham launched a crowdfunding effort called #RefuelCaterhamF1 on the website CrowdCube in order to generate the £2.35 million needed to race in Abu Dhabi. In less than 2 days they raised over £1 million, and 5 days later they confirmed their attendance at the final race of the season. Kobayashi returned to race, however Ericsson had already terminated his contract and signed with Sauber. Andre Lotterer was offered it but turned it down. Retired driver Rubens Barrichello was also in contention. Robin Freins was still under contract as the team's reserve driver, but had been almost completely neglected since the buyout in July due to lack of sponsorship money. Former academy driver Will Stevens eventually took the second seat after paying the team £500,000 to race. Caterham arrived at Abu Dhabi with cars adorned with the logos of crowdfunders such as the Windmill Inn in Littleworth, West Sussex. Practice ran smoothly and they unsurprisingly qualified on the back row of the grid, with Kobayashi 1.7 seconds behind Pastor Maldonado and Stevens half a second behind Kobayashi. Both Red Bulls were excluded from qualifying and started from the pit lane, and Romain Grosjean was given a grid penalty which meant Kobayashi and Stevens started 16th and 17th. Stevens was passed by Grosjean off the line. Maldonado ran wide at turn 1 which allowed Kobayashi through. Maldonado repassed Kobayashi around the outside of turn 7. Kobayashi then passed Adrian Sutil at turn 13. Stevens was passed by Ricciardo at turn 15 and Vettel at turn 17. Grosjean then served a drive-through penalty at the end of lap 1 and came out 10 seconds behind Stevens. Ricciardo and Sutil passed Kobayashi at turn 8 on lap 5. Vettel then passed him at turn 11. Grosjean passed Stevens at turn 11 on lap 7. Stevens made his first pit stop on lap 14. Daniel Kvyat retired on lap 15, which gave both drivers a place. Kobayashi then pitted and the two drivers were 16 seconds apart in 18th and 19th. Stevens first got lapped on lap 19. Maldonado retired on lap 27, which gave both drivers a place. Kobayashi was then lapped on lap 30. Kobayashi made his second stop on lap 36 and Stevens on lap 37. Kobayashi started getting vibrations which eventually made the car undrivable, so he pulled into the pits and out of the race on lap 42. Stevens then continued alone at the back to finish in 17th, 1 minute and 17 seconds behind the next car. This had been the most tumultuous season for both teams since their first campaigns as Lotus and Version in 2010, and was one of extreme highs and lows. As with 2013, Marussia had started the season stronger than Caterham, and early on finally managed to take advantage of the misfortunes of faster teams to score their first ever points in Monaco. Outside of this, however, not once did they beat any midfield teams on pure pace. Reliability was generally good. There were 3 mechanical retirements across the season and 3 caused by accidents. Despite having a slower car, their points finish and superior reliability meant they beat both Caterham and midfield team Sauber to finish 9th in the Constructors' Championship. Caterham did not adjust well to the hybrid era. The car was poorly designed and unreliable, and they had 2 crash-prone drivers, with 10 mechanical retirements and 2 race-ending accidents. Fortunes improved after the summer break with major upgrades brought by the new management, but their financial woes ended their season early, and they finished 11th and last in the Constructors' Championship. Jules Bianchi had another strong season. He won the Marussia qualifying battle 12-3, qualified fastest of the 4 drivers 8 times, advanced to Q2 3 times, and won the Marussia race battle 8-2. He had only 2 retirements across the year, 1 mechanical and 1 an accident caused by his teammate, but did also get involved in clashes that gave him race-ruining punctures on 2 occasions. The real highlight of the year came by scoring the team's first points in Monaco. This meant he won the driver battle and also beat the stalwarts of Adrian Sutil and Esteban Gutierrez to finish 17th in the championship. However, this would be his last season in F1. 6 weeks after his accident, he was taken off of a ventilator and out of an artificially induced coma, which allowed him to be transferred from Japan to the University of Nice Central Hospital in France. But he never woke up and died there on July 17, 2015, aged 25. Marcus Ericsson's rookie year was overall fairly weak. He had 4 mechanical retirements and crashed out of 1 race early on. He lost the Caterham qualifying battle 12-4 and went fastest of the 4 drivers only twice. He also lost the Caterham race battle 6-2. There was a brief surge in form after the summer break, particularly in Suzuka, where despite his spin early on he was by far the fastest of the 4 drivers in the race. However, this form did not last as he terminated his contract after the team went into administration and moved to Sauber. He finished 19th in the championship with the best result of 11th at the Monaco Grand Prix. Max Chilton's second season in Formula 1 was generally better than his first. He managed 25 consecutive finishes from his debut before his first retirement. He lost the qualifying battle again 12-3 and qualified fastest of the 4 drivers only twice, but did make Q2 once. He also lost the race battle 8-2. Despite this, he could generally keep up with Caterham, even if Bianchi was usually comfortably ahead. He finished 21st in the championship with the best result of 13th at the Australian and Bahrain Grand Prix. Kamui Kobayashi was by far the most experienced of the 4 drivers, though this was not reflected in his results. He won the Caterham qualifying battle 30-4 and qualified fastest of the 4 drivers 3 times, including 1 Q2 appearance. He won the Caterham race battle 6-2, but he had 5 mechanical retirements, failed to start 1 race and crashed out of another. He spent the entire year battling a car with underheating tyres and overheating brakes. He finished 22nd in the championship with the best result of 13th at the Malaysian and Monaco Grand Prix. This tied him with Chilton, however Chilton had a 14th place finish as his next best result to Kobayashi's 2 15th place finishes. Will Stevens paid a lot of money for his one-off appearance for Caterham, and his 17th place finish gave him 23rd in the championship. Andre Lotterer's career in Formula 1 lasted less than 2 laps, but throughout the whole weekend he upstaged Ericsson and demonstrated why he was so well respected in endurance racing. By not finishing in his sole appearance, he was unclassified at the bottom of the standings for 2014. After the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, a 2-day young drivers test took place at Yas Marina. Will Stevens ran on both days for Caterham, but this would end up being the last time they hit the track. They were still searching for the funding needed to race in 2015. They were on the 2015 entry list. The FIA gave them permission to use their 2014 car for the 2015 season if they were able to find a buyer, despite the fact that a 2015 car had been in development. By February 2015, no buyers had come forward, and so the team's assets were put up for auction, including both 2014 chassis and 2011 and 2013 chassis that had been stripped of their engines and gearboxes and converted into show cars. One of the 2014 chassis was bought by Kevin Thomas, minus the engine, gearbox, wheels, suspension and wings, who since then has been slowly restoring it to operating condition. The factory in Leafield was seized and locked up by the administrators. All equipment was removed and the site was put up for sale. It lies abandoned and on sale to this day, but has become a popular target for vandals, graffiti artists and urban explorers. As Lotus, Caterham had entered 38 races. Their best result was Heikki Kovalainen's 12th place finish at the 2010 Japanese Grand Prix, and their highest ever grid slot was Kovalainen's 13th place start at the 2010 Belgian Grand Prix. From 38 race entries, there were 74 starts. 20 of these ended in retirements, 17 mechanical and 3 accidents. With Heikki Kovalainen and Jarno Trulli at the helm, they were comfortably faster than rivals Version and HRT, and finished 10th in the Constructors' Championship both years. As Caterham, they entered 56 races. Their best result was 11th place finishes by Vitaly Petrov at the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix and Marcus Ericsson at the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix, and their highest ever grid slot was Guido van der Garde's 14th place start at the 2013 Belgian Grand Prix. From 56 entries, there were 110 starts. 23 of these ended in retirement, 18 mechanical and 5 accidents. They were in a gradual decline from the start of the campaign, where they initially were almost as fast as the lower midfield teams, but slowly got overtaken by Marussia to be beaten to 10th in the Constructors in 2013 and 2014. Their business dealings following their collapse were still unresolved for some time, until in January 2019 when all staff finally received their redundancy pay after a 4-year wait. And with that, Caterham F1 team was no more. Marussia went into administration in December 2014. All staff were made redundant and the administrators began auctioning off their assets, including cars from the previous 5 seasons, minus the engines and gearboxes, which were returned to Cosworth and Ferrari. Their factory in Banbury was put up for sale as well. All seemed lost for the team. However, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and this was not the end of their story. Join me for part 6, where we shall look at Marussia's 2015 campaign. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, follow me on Twitter @Brook_F1, and I'll see you all next time.